Have you ever gotten a certified letter in the mail? Opened it standing at your kitchen counter, still in your work clothes, and read the words, Notice of Change of Ownership, and felt something that wasn't quite shock, because some part of you had always known something was coming. You just didn't know it would be this? I stood there for a long time. The letter said the building at 2240 Fairview Avenue, Unit 4B, had been sold. New owner effective March 1st. All rent payments to be redirected to a new management company. The new owner's name was listed at the bottom of the letter. Rebecca Calloway. My sister's married name. I had lived in that apartment for 11 years. I had watched 3 sets of neighbors move in and out. I had repainted the bathroom twice with my landlord's permission. I had a key to the storage unit in the basement. I had a coffee maker that had been on the same counter since 2012. My sister had bought the building I lived in without telling me. And she had set my rent to increase by $840 a month starting April 1st. Before I continue, if you've ever had family use money to exercise power over you in a way that was so quiet and so specific that you almost couldn't believe it was intentional, I need you to stay with me. Because the question of whether it was intentional is going to matter a lot in this story. My name is Nora, and this is what 11 years of quiet family resentment looked like when it finally had a dollar amount attached to it. I moved into 4B when I was 29 years old. It was a Tuesday in November, a cold one, and I carried everything I owned up 2 flights of stairs over the course of a single afternoon, with the help of 2 friends and a pizza bribe. The apartment was 780 square feet, 1 bedroom, a narrow galley kitchen, a living room with windows that faced west and caught the evening light in a way that stopped me the first time I saw it. I signed a 1-year lease. I stayed 11. In those 11 years, I finished my master's degree at that desk by the west window. I worked through 2 job changes, one of which was a layoff that took me 8 months to recover from. I had a relationship that lasted 3 years and ended without drama. I adopted a cat named Howard, who is 17 years old and has survived everything, including 3 lease renewals and a brief period where I thought I might move to Portland. I did not move to Portland. I could not leave Howard. That is a different story. The point is this: 4B was not just an address. It was the container of my adult life. The place I came home to after everything, good and bad. The place where I knew where every light switch was in the dark. My landlord, a man named Gerald Pfeiffer, was 73 years old. He owned the building and 2 others in the city, had owned them since the 1980s, and managed them himself with a quiet competence that made him a good landlord in the specific, underrated way of good landlords. He fixed things when they were broken. He didn't raise rent aggressively. He responded to messages within 24 hours, and he left you alone otherwise. He called me in January to tell me he was selling. Not the certified letter, an actual phone call. Gerald was that kind of person. He said he was 73. He said his wife had been after him for years to simplify. He said the buildings were becoming more than he wanted to manage at his age. He said he'd found a buyer he felt good about. He said, I wanted to tell you personally, Nora. You've been a good tenant. I asked if I'd have a chance to buy the unit or if the building was selling as a whole. He said the whole building. 1 transaction, and the buyer had already been identified. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat with Howard in the west window light and thought about what it would mean to leave. I did not know, in that moment, that leaving was not going to be my decision.
Rebecca is 4 years older than me. She married well, her phrase, not mine, at 31 to a man named Patrick Calloway, who worked in commercial real estate and had, over the past decade, built a portfolio of properties across 3 states. Rebecca did not work in real estate. Rebecca did not work in the traditional sense, which was also her phrase and not mine. She sat on 2 charity boards, she decorated their home, she raised their 2 children, and did it well, genuinely, in ways I respected, even when I found her exhausting. Our relationship had always had the particular texture of a relationship between sisters who love each other, but have never quite understood each other. She thought I was overly independent, overly private, allergic to the kind of help that came with strings. I thought she was overly invested in appearances, overly comfortable in a life that Patrick had built rather than one she had chosen. We were both right. We were also both sometimes unfair. What I did not know, what I had no reason to know, was that for at least 2 years prior to Gerald's call, Rebecca and Patrick had been actively looking to expand their property holdings, and that at some point in that search, Patrick had found Gerald's building on a listing, had researched its tenants, and had seen my name attached to Unit 4B. And that Rebecca had not mentioned this to Patrick as a reason to look elsewhere. That is the part I have spent the most time with. The part where she saw my name and kept going. The certified letter arrived on a Friday in February. I read it twice. I looked up the management company, a shell LLC that traces back, with minimal effort, to Patrick Calloway's primary holding company. I sat down. Then, I called Rebecca. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was normal. Warm, even. The voice she used when we were having a good month. I said, "Did you buy my building?" A pause. Not long enough to be shock. Long enough to be preparation. She said, "Patrick and I made an investment, yes. My building. The building I've lived in for 11 years. We've been expanding the portfolio. This property fit our criteria. Rebecca, why didn't you tell me?" Another pause. We weren't sure the deal would close. We didn't want to. The deal closed. I got a certified letter. My rent is going up $840 a month starting April. Silence. "That's the market rate adjustment," she said finally. "The building has been under rented for years. It's standard practice when ownership changes." I stared at my wall. The wall I had painted myself. The wall that had a small scuff near the baseboard from the time I moved the bookshelf in 2019. "Standard practice," I said. "Nora, this is a business investment. It's not personal." I want you to hold that sentence. It's not personal. She knew my name was in that building before she bought it. She bought it anyway. She raised my rent by nearly $1,000. And she called it not personal. I need to tell you what $840 a month meant in concrete terms, because the way people talk about rent increases sometimes makes them sound abstract. My rent was $11.50 a month under Gerald. It had gone up twice in 11 years, both times by $50, both times with 6 months' notice, and a note from Gerald that said he was sorry, but materials costs were up. The new rent would be $1,990. I earned $67,000 a year as a program coordinator for a nonprofit focused on adult literacy. After taxes and benefits, my monthly take-home was approximately $4,200. $1,990 in rent was 47% of my monthly income. The general guidance for housing costs is 30%. I was being asked to go to 47%, or move. Rebecca and Patrick's household income was, conservatively, 12 times mine. That is not a complaint. People earn different amounts. That is simply the shape of the situation, stated plainly, so you understand what it's not personal meant in material terms. It meant you can either pay nearly half your income to live in the home you've had for 11 years, or you can leave. It meant we have the power to make you choose, and we're choosing to use it. Whether Rebecca understood that is the question I am still sitting with.
My mother called me the following Sunday. She called every Sunday, which was a rhythm we'd had for 15 years. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know." I said, "You know?" She said, "Rebecca told me about the property purchase in December. I didn't know about the rent increase." December. 2 months before the certified letter. 6 weeks before Gerald's personal call to me. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" I thought Rebecca would. She didn't. I know that now. I sat with that for a moment. My mother is not a cruel woman. She is also not a confrontational one. She exists in the space between her daughters the way some parents do, trying to hold both, ending up holding neither quite fully. "Do you think she knew what she was doing?" I asked. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I think Rebecca has always felt like you had something she didn't, and I've never been able to figure out what she thought it was." That answer has stayed with me longer than any other part of this story. What did Rebecca think I had? I had a smaller apartment, and a smaller salary, and a 17-year-old cat, and a life I had built slowly and independently in ways she had never seemed to value or understand. I had chosen myself, consistently, without a safety net. And maybe that, the choosing, the independence, the fact that I had always landed without Patrick Calloway's portfolio catching me, maybe that was the thing she couldn't name and couldn't let go of. I don't know. I'm still not sure I'll ever know. I did not pay the new rent. I want to be precise. I did not refuse to pay rent. I continued paying $1,150, my existing rate, while I consulted a tenants' rights attorney named Susan Okafor, who had an office 6 blocks from my building and a reputation for being extremely good at her job. Susan told me 3 things. First, the new owner was legally required to honor the terms of my existing lease through its current end date, which was August 31st. They could not raise the rent before the lease renewed. Second, the notice of increase had been sent before the lease end date, which was improper under city ordinance. That created a filing opportunity. Third, the building had 3 other long-term tenants, all of whom had received the same letter, and all of whom were in similar situations. "You're not alone in this building," Susan said, "and that matters." She was right. I knocked on doors. I had conversations I should have had years ago with my neighbors. A woman named Diane in 2A, who had lived there 9 years, a retired teacher named Mr. Osei in 1B, who had lived there 14, a young couple in 3C, who'd moved in only 2 years ago, but were also looking at an $840 increase. We filed a joint complaint with the city's housing authority, citing improper notice procedures. We retained Susan collectively, splitting her retainer 4 ways. Patrick Calloway, who had 15 years of commercial real estate experience, had not done his homework on residential tenant law in our city. That was his first mistake. His second mistake was having Rebecca call me the week after we filed. She called on a Wednesday evening. Her voice was different this time, tighter, the warmth stripped out of it. She said, "Patrick says you filed a complaint." I said. I did. Nora, we're family. You couldn't just call me? I did call you. You told me it wasn't personal. Silence. This is going to cost everyone time and money, she said. Patrick is furious. This is a legitimate business investment. I know it is, I said, and my response to it is a legitimate legal process. Those two things can both be true. You're making this into something it isn't. Rebecca, I kept my voice level. You bought the building I live in without telling me. You raised my rent by $840 a month. You called it not personal. What would you like me to call it? She didn't answer that. Instead, she said, Mom is upset. I said, Mom knows what happened. She thinks you're being vindictive. I thought about that for a moment, about whether what I was doing was vindictive, whether protecting my home and my finances by using the legal tools available to me qualified as vindictiveness. I decided it did not. I'm protecting my housing, I said, the same way you're protecting your investment. I hope the housing authority process is straightforward for everyone. Good night, Rebecca. I hung up. Howard jumped on my lap approximately 4 seconds later, as if he'd been waiting for the call to end. I sat there in the west window light with my elderly cat and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Steady.
The housing authority found in our favor on the improper notice issue. The rent increase was delayed by 6 months, and the amount was reduced for all 4 units with long-term tenants under a provision protecting residents of 5 or more years from disproportionate increases. My new rent, when it finally adjusted, was $1,480. Still an increase, a manageable one. Mr. Osei used the extra 6 months to find a senior living community he preferred. Diane found a condo she was able to purchase with help from a first-time buyer program Susan pointed her toward. The young couple in 3C moved to a less expensive neighborhood and bought a house. I stayed. I'm still in 4B. My landlord is now my sister's husband. We interact through the management company. It is exactly as strange as it sounds. Rebecca and I do not speak regularly. At holidays, we are cordial. My mother moves carefully between us, which I imagine is exhausting for her, and I carry some guilt about that, even though I did not create the situation. Last spring, Rebecca sent me a text that said, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you before the letter. That was wrong." It was the first apology she had ever offered me that did not come with a qualification attached. I replied, "Thank you for saying that." That was all. We are not repaired, but that exchange was real. And real is where repair, if it comes, will have to start.
What I know now that I didn't know then, tenant rights are real. Legal tools exist. You don't have to absorb what is done to you simply because the person doing it has more resources than you do. Neighbors are underutilized. 4 people together accomplished something none of us could have done alone. And the west window light, the light that stopped me the first time I saw this apartment, that has been the backdrop of my entire adult life, is still there. Every evening. Exactly as it was. Some things, if you fight for them, you get to keep. Fight for them.